This film is going to document how families are being treated and how mentally ill people are being treated in our community. The dually diagnosed get there because they've been self-medicating for years because their pain is so real. Drugs are more available than anything else.
There have been quite a few deaths in our community just in the last couple of years, and families are so traumatized. You don't hear about it, but we know because we paid attention because our kids died.
The point of the town hall is to not point fingers, but to stop and relook at this and say there are better ways we can do this.
And let's do it together, all of us together.
My name is Karen and I have a 17-year-old son. Our family is in crisis and has been for about a year. My son was diagnosed as being clinically depressed and has taken to street drugs. He's had access to heroin, meth, LSD, all the prescription drugs that you can name, Paxil, methadone, trazodone. You've just done everything to try and combat his depression. It's just really one day he's all together, he's there, and then the next day he's lost. I mean, one day he's calm, the next day he's angry, he's stressed out, he's anxious, he's furious, all kinds of things. And it's just on a daily basis it changes. You never know what's going to happen. He did actually try and take his own life with a bottle of Advil, and we've just been to Cottage Hospital, and then from Cottage Hospital they were going to release him to us, and I said no, we were in that position where we need to send him and get help, and he needs a little longer term than just coming home because we're in crisis. We don't know what to do. We have no options for our youth. They go into the juvenile hall, they stay there for a couple of days, then they're out. Some are staying there for 2 weeks, some are staying there for 3 days, but they're going in, out, and to me it doesn't look like they're getting any benefit from the system. This is something bigger than just a family can cope with. We're all here, but it is bigger than we can handle. We do need help.
My son, Mateo, is a person dually diagnosed with bipolar and substance abuse. His latest incident with law enforcement involved the poor choice of refusing to stop and talk to police officers when confronted. He was eventually tasered. Finally, he was charged with resisting arrest and given a 1-year prison sentence. We had kept encouraging him to not plead guilty and to at least fight the charges because he really wasn't guilty of anything. This is his second stay in state prison. First one was for basically a year also. And that incarceration was simply because he refused to participate in a drug diversion program, not again for no crime committed. This incident that we're talking about here, there was no crime committed, there was no drug abuse, there was no weapons involved. When they're put in prison or jail, nothing is better by the time they get out. They're out the door and some of them start at the very day that they're out, right back on the same track.
I have a son named Michael. He's 27 years old. For the last 6 years, I saw a big change in him. 3 years ago, he tried to commit suicide and he was in the Cottage Hospital for 1 week. Upon his release, there was no plan, no treatment, no linkage, just 1 bottle of medication. When that was done with, it started over again. And I feel so bad because I feel that I've placed him in the system. Because of our little arguments, I thought this would help him. It made the situation worse. He wanted me to tell you that jail is not the answer to this problem. He says jail did nothing for him. In fact, it made the situation worse. And he wanted me to share an incident that happened to him while in custody. He signed up to be an inmate helper, and he was told, being an inmate helper, if there was anything that would be a health risk or something he couldn't do, to tell them. And he called me and he says, "Mom, they're feeding me a lot better and I'm in a better area. So one day they asked him to clean up vomit from one of the vans. He said it was red and it was just all over, it was disgusting, and he wanted to throw up, and he told the utility workers he couldn't do it. They put him in the safety room, they stripped him down. There's no bathroom, there's no bed, there's no blanket, there's no water, there's no paper. There's just a hole on the floor. He was placed in there for 3 days, 2 days with no food or water. When he was taken out of the safety room, he was placed in Module A. We were told that Module A, B, and C is for the worst of the criminals, and he was beat up very badly. They almost broke his jaw and a rib. He called me and he told me, "Mom, don't visit me. I need time to think about this." But he didn't tell me what happened. And a month later, when I went to visit him, I saw bruises on his face. I asked him what happened, and he didn't tell me until after he was released. He was court ordered to live in a living sober home. Whenever he would act funny or strange or talk to himself, they would drug test him, and the results were always negative. I tried to make numerous appointments for him in the county, and we would be on hold for 20 to 25 minutes. So he was kicked out of the living sober home, and once again, my son was in the street. I felt there was no more hope. I felt there's no one out there to hear my story, to help my son. I felt just like all of the others, he wasn't going to make it. So I just started to prepare his funeral. Someone left me the article of the revolving door, and when I read it, I cried, and I thought, finally, there's people out there that know my situation. On that week, Friday, my son showed up, and I was off from work, and he was talking to himself, and he just seemed really out there, where I knew that if he goes back into the street, I wasn't going to see him again. So that morning, Suzanne was calling me. She said, "Don't worry, we're going to get help." She called the CARES unit, and everyone was at lunch, but the person that answered the phone, Bradley, he happened to be in the office, and that was his day off. So she sent him to my home, and he talked to Michael. Suzanne gave me a number of a police officer who works in the downtown area with the homeless, Bob Casey, and he told me he would be looking out for my son and try to talk to him if he saw him. So later that day, around 5:30, he was walking around in a store talking to himself, and the employees of that store called the police. They found out that there was a warrant out for his arrest because I had been calling his probation officer, asking her and pleading with her to arrest my son because I didn't want him in the street. Bob Casey showed up as well, and he was on his day off. And he's told the police officers he's not going to jail, he's going to the PUF unit. Following week, he had to go to court, and both Bradley from the CARES unit and his probation officer showed up, and the judge was upset and said, why did you send him to the hospital if there was a warrant out for his arrest? And they said, "Your Honor, we saved a life." Later, I found out when my daughter came to visit him that Friday, he was doing his rounds to visit the family because he had planned to commit suicide at the beach. And now, every day when he walks out of the hospitality house, he looks up at the sky and he thanks God he's alive. If it hadn't been for the wonderful people at the CARES unit, having a caseworker has helped my son tremendously. They talk to him, they say hello to him, the staff says hello to him when he walks in there. They make him feel like a human being and not like an animal.
He spent all Christmas in jail, and Christmas night he was very depressed. I did not know at the time, but I guess he tried to commit suicide, and he cut his arm. He got 2 long cuts. His cellmate woke up and saw the blood and called the guards, and They took him to the emergency room. They saved his life. There was not much follow-up from the jail after that. They had him sign a contract saying that he won't try to commit suicide never again. They didn't tell me nothing. They just, you just go to jail and they tell you he's not available right now and they don't know anything. You should just wait for him to call you or you call in. He did commit an offense, so he had to do the time. He got released before his court date, before they sentenced him. And this was just probably 3 or 4 weeks after he tried to commit suicide in the jail. And the reason why he tried to commit suicide was because he was going to do all this time in jail and he was very upset. I don't see why they would release him out with nothing, just out of the cold. I don't know what they thought that would happen during the 2 weeks that he was going to be outside. I think it was just the crowd, the jail was overcrowded and they just released people without really following up or seeing what happened. The day that he died, I did go to the hotel and I was waiting outside and knocking on the door and nobody was coming. The sheriff went to my work and we sat down and he told me that they found my brother in the room. He probably died during the night, or they really didn't know exactly what time. And it was an overdose. Well, at the time I didn't know what to do. My mom, with the whole stress, she took care of my brother for like 2 years, but it was really hard on her. Like my sister and I, we didn't know, who was going to die first. My brother of an overdose or my mom.
After he died, and I learned more about what he was going through there. Here he was in a system where I was trying not to intervene, but he was at the mercy of a system that is not set up. It's not set up for somebody who has a diagnosis. He was bipolar. He was initially diagnosed as personality disorder. And nobody asked me. And in fact, they don't want you to intervene. And he didn't want me to intervene. And it's so wrong that so many times when your child is in major crisis, the only place that you can call is the police. And from that moment on, here's someone who's just calling out for help and needs to be mentored and calmed down, but instead the police show up and he ends up in a jail. He gets out of the jail and then he's crossing the street one day and the cops they stop him for jaywalking. And, oh, you're on probation. What are you doing out at this hour? Back into the jail. So it's like round and round and round and round. There's never any help. There's only this idea, oh, I'm a bad person. I'm a bad person.
We tried and tried and tried to get him residential treatment through the county, but he could never quite get it. We were told that he could get residential treatment if we signed a letter saying that we would not allow him to come home. If we would make him homeless, then he would be able to get residential treatment. It was one of the hardest things we ever did in our life, but we wrote that letter and we told him he couldn't come home. We thought in a few days he would get into Phoenix House. What happened is they had openings, but he didn't get in. There were too many people still ahead of him. Finally, I wrote a bunch of letters and got a meeting with County Mental Health, and when I said that we had been trying for 9 years and he had never had priority to get treatment, they said that he would be able to get into Phoenix House. And sure enough, next time there was an opening, he got in. However, 10 days after he got there, he used some of his own prescribed medication, but it made it so that he didn't wake up, and it worried them, and so they called the police. He was taken to jail. We were told that he had to stay on the streets. He could not get back into Phoenix House if we let him come home. So he slept down by Mission Creek for several weeks, waiting and waiting to get back into Phoenix House. He never got in. One evening he was sleeping by the railroad track, and the police came and they found some drug paraphernalia. This was his salvation. Because of his drug use, which he had which had happened with all those times of staying on the street trying to get help. He was able to get into a drug program. Finally, he was going to get some residential treatment. He found recovery there, and then he moved up to Santa Cruz and lived in a beautiful redwood house by the ocean. However, it was closing. He had no place to go. And he went up in the redwoods and lay down on a blanket. We didn't know where he was for a year. And finally, a year later, his bones were found by a mushroom hunter.
We've got to stop the criminalization of the mentally ill.
We have got to come up with a better solution, all of us together.